Where's Debbie?
There it goes. I don't know. She dropped.
She's trying to get back in.
She's not yet. No, she's not listed here. It'll come up when she does. But second beast was a bear. The third was a leopard. And then he sees a fourth beast, which was terrible, dreadful, and very strong. And this seems to be the one that there are 10 horns on it. I believe there's another horn that comes up, and 3 of the first 10 are kind of plucked up when he comes up. Oh, there's Debbie.
Yeah, yeah.
Hey, what happened?
I don't know. You were in the middle of prayer and then you all had your head bowed and I was like, why'd he stop talking? And then I lost internet connection.
That's weird.
Yeah.
Well, we were just recapping the 4 beasts that came out of the sea in Daniel's vision that he had when Belshazzar was the king. So he's at this point taking notice of the little horn. The little horn comes up, and in the midst of it, it's speaking a lot of. It's got a mouth of a man and eyes of a man as well, and he is looking at it as it's speaking great things, and suddenly the scene seems to change, where he's now looking or seeing a vision of heaven, and he's seeing God and some of his attributes, and then he sees his throne and the fire that comes out and all these beings that are sitting there standing before him. And it says the court sat in judgment and the books were open in verse 10. We started speaking about verse 11. It says, because the sound of the great words, the horn was speaking, I looked and the beast was killed and its body destroyed and given over to be burned with fire. And so we sort of made the assumption here that the little horn continues to kind of blabber on with whatever he's saying up until Judgment Day, which case he's burned with fire. And then we started to look about, like, in the Bible, about some of the other instances of being burned with fire. And we found that Babylon in Revelation 11, the harlot in Revelation 17 were burned with fire. Achan, the Israelite in Joshua 7, who took of the devoted thing, was burned because he took that Babylonish garment, and then I think he took gold, some type of gold and silver for himself, and buried it in the earth. He was burned. And then we started talking about David's last words, and I think that's where we left off. But we kind of rushed through it, so I wanted to kind of start, because I wasn't finished the tangent that I was on. Stop. And so we're going to start in 2 Samuel 23. 2 Samuel 23, verse 1 through 7. Before we read, though, this is considered, we read this last week, we did it fast, but there was a prophecy that's built in here. It's considered prophecy by something called the Targum. I think you could see it once you recognize it, but you can see what the words are saying. And it is prophetic in a lot of ways, and it sort of plays into what we're talking about. So this is building upon being burned with fire, like the little horn is in Daniel's dream at, I guess, evidently the Judgment Day. So we're going to just take a look at these first 7 verses. So somebody want to read, how about, go ahead.
You said 2 Samuel 23.
Yeah, verses, how about just start with verse 1.
All right. There are the last words of David, the inspired utterance of David, son of Jesse, the utterance utterance of the man exalted by the Most High, the man anointed by the God of Jacob, the hero of Israel's songs.
So this would be obviously referring to David, but it's also referring to Jesus because he's the anointed of God, which is also a word that's used for Messiah, certainly in the Old Testament. So if you want to just continue on with the next two verses.
Okay. The Spirit of the Lord spoke through me. His word was on my tongue. The God of Israel spoke. The Rock of Israel said to me, when one rules over people in righteousness, when he rules in the fear of God.
You can keep going with the next verse.
He is like the light of morning at sunrise on a cloudless morning, like the brightness after rain that brings grass from the earth.
Okay, this is again, we've saw this same type of thing being referred to in other places, certainly in the Old Testament, where Jesus is referred to this way, but it's usually after his second coming. So he's the light of the morning, the sun finally rises. It's been cloudy, rainy. The tender grass springs out of the earth through clear, shining rain. So Jesus comes, of course, as the early rain, and he also comes as the latter rain. Early rain was an axe, and it would appear that latter rain is sometime around the time that he comes again, or just before, or something along those lines. I'm not 100% sure, but keep going, Meg.
Okay. If my house were not right with God, surely he would not have made with me an everlasting covenant, arranged and secured in every part. Surely he would not bring to frustration my salvation and grant me my every desire.
Anybody have anything different there, a different version?
I
No,
have,
that's NIV. I think we all have NIV pulled up.
I have house be not so with God, yet he hath made me an everlasting covenant, ordered in all things, sure. For this is all my salvation and all my desire, although he make it not to grow.
So here in Dee's passage, it's also in other versions too. It's a controversial translation because I don't think people are quite sure of what it means. But in the version you read, Meg, he is saying something a little different. He's talking at the end about he doesn't forget about me, and he causes it to grow. But in the version that Dee read, he has an everlasting covenant, but he maketh it not to grow. Okay, so there's a difference. It's actually a big difference there. Now we could say that refers to David's house. Okay, now David's house did grow in some ways, but he had some waywardness within his house. For instance, Absalom, Amnon, who fell in love with his half sister, and he just had a lot of insanity going on in his own house. But the reference could possibly it could also be to Jesus's house that started off with great flurry and really hasn't grown. I mean, yeah, you could say it's spread, but it hasn't spread tremendously throughout the world for the way that it started. And that's not a crack, it's just the truth. He's put limits on, how much he reveals, how much his power, even to the most godly of those, we know that he doesn't seem as if he allows it to grow very big. But we did see on verse 4 where after a certain time, the tender grass does spring up out of the earth after the rain. And we also know that we saw, well, before we go into that, let's continue and read verse 6 and 7.
I wonder why they translated it that way. It says something totally different there.
I know.
There's a lot of misunderstanding as to what it meant, but I was searching these verses for something completely different. And I discovered what I think it means. But read the next two verses and maybe it'll make a little more sense.
All right. But evil men are all to be cast aside like thorns, which are not gathered with the hand. Whoever touches thorns uses a tool of iron or the shaft of a spear. They are burned up where they lie.
Now, the thorns in those two verses, or the ungodly, are needing to be thrust away, gotten rid of, says they can't be taken with the hand. Well, why? What would happen to the hand if they reached in and grabbed the
We'll
thorn?
get cut up.
Right, they get wounded, right?
Uh-huh.
So he mentions iron and a staff of spear, and they are going to be, again, utterly burned with fire. But these thorns that are being referred to are the ungodly in the midst of what seems to be David's house, certainly Jesus's house. They must be handled with iron and spear and utterly burned. Now, is the implication with these thorns within this house preventing the house from truly growing?
It would seem so.
Now, back in, and I would say probably, yeah, that's the implication, because back in Joshua 7, we were referring to Achan last time. And if you remember, Achan had taken the devoted thing, and God seemed to say the Israelites couldn't defeat their enemies with the devoted thing in the midst. Okay, so Achan was theoretically an Israelite, but he had sin or whatever within him that was, considered the devoted thing. And because of it, it affected everybody, despite nobody else even having any understanding that it was there. They only knew when they went to defeat their enemies, in which case God said, well, no, when he told Joshua to get off your face, stand up, and get rid of the devoted thing in the midst, and then God showed him. But anyway, in both cases, the wicked, Achan and his men, because we found out it was more than one. And in this case, the thorns needed to be burned with fire. Okay. But in both instances, the suggestion seems to be you're not going to grow and you're not going to have strength to defeat your enemies with this in the midst. Now, that's sort of implied in both of those cases. But let's turn to Hebrews 6, 7 and 8.
You know what that made me think of? What was that the one guy that said, even though God won't take those thorns out of my side?
Paul.
Is it Paul?
Yeah.
Which he was like he was really influential, right?
Well,
Yeah.
Paul, we were just reading that in another Bible study that I'm in. He was just given that because he had seen or been taken to the third heaven, and God knew how prideful one would get when they've had spiritual journeys on them. So he seemed to give them that, like a thorn in the side. It could be an evil spirit. Keep them humble.
Yeah.
Oh,
But anyway,
Lots of speculation about what that was.
yeah, agreed. Hebrews 6, 7, and 8.
Hebrews, wait, I'm sorry, what? Hebrews 6?
Yeah, verses 7 and 8.
Okay. Land, tell me if I'm in the right area.
Yes, you are.
Yes.
All right. Land that drinks in the rain, often falling on it, and that produces a crop useful to those for whom it is farmed, receives the blessing of God. But land that produces thorns and thistles is worthless and is in danger of being cursed. In the end, it will be burned.
Okay, so this is the land. This is the land of God. I mean, and we've shown two examples where the land itself had thistles or thorns or whatever, and the thorns ultimately are burned. Now, in the New Testament, tares are those that have been sown amongst the wheat. Remember? Satan's, it said while men were sleeping or something, Satan comes and sows tares within the God's field. And it says in Matthew 13:40, as therefore tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the world. But they grow together until the end of the world here.
Because if you tear them up, if you tear up the tares, so to speak, you would hurt the crops.
Right.
So it says we're going to let them grow together.
But the insinuation is that because of that, God very much limits, at least I think what he's saying is, once the evil's burned, gotten rid of, again, I'm guessing that happens on day 7. There's only so much growth that he allows to occur. He kind of, like, as David would say, he kind of keeps it, I'm just trying to think how he said it in that last verse. He maketh it not to grow. Well, David's house did grow, but it sure had a lot of difficulty. And I would say, probably would say the same thing about the state of the God's church here on earth too. Let's turn to Psalms 57:4. Psalms 57, verse 4.
I'll read it. I am in the midst of lions. Just the one verse there?
Yeah.
I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords.
So this, well, first of all, who just from what we've read, who is among lions? Who's been among the lions? Last chapter.
Daniel?
I
Yeah.
know.
Okay. Now, now let's think about this. Who are those that are set on fire?
Thorns.
Yes, exactly. Even the sons of men whose teeth are spears and arrows, their tongues are a sharp sword. This is a picture where God's placed his people, all right, in the midst of the lions, in the midst of the those that set themselves on fire. And this is where he chooses at this point for them to be. And that verse kind of brings us back. Now, those that were set on fire are the, as Meg said, the thorns are also the tares, the harlot, Babylon, Achan, in theory, those members of David's family that had such difficulty, all the same. Now, they're not, in essence, set on fire right now, but the reference to be, those would be, in essence, the lions or those that would set themselves on fire without even realizing it. Now, let's go back to Daniel 7. And by the way, just as we continue on in Daniel, I just want to say, I have no great anything for the understanding of what the dream may mean. So we'll get, we're going to go back to that. But I just want to say it's been debated since, it was first recorded, what exactly it refers to, but I'll make mention of what people think it means. So you guys have some understanding of that. Anyways, back in Daniel 7, if somebody wants to read the 13 and 14, and probably before we do, we never talked about verse 12, which was the verse after the little horn or whatever being burned with fire. It was, as for the rest of the beasts, their dominion was taken away, but their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. So I'm guessing the other 3 remain somehow. We did talk about that, Debbie. I remember Debbie saying something about they don't have a kingdom per se or an empire, but they're still alive. But anyway, somebody do 13 and 14.
I got it. So in my vision at night, I looked, and before me was one like a son of man coming from the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed.
So Daniel witnesses Jesus in heaven being brought before God, and God gives him dominion and an eternal king which shall reign forever, as in Revelation 11:15. Somebody wants to turn to Revelation 11:15. Keep your finger here, but somebody read that verse.
I have it. Revelation 11:15. The seventh angel sounded his trumpet, and there were loud voices in heaven, which said, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord and of his Messiah, and he will reign forever and ever."
So I'm guessing this is the same event. Jesus comes back to heaven in verse, is it 13, with his clouds, which, what do we say the clouds probably were?
His people?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's his people that are referenced as clouds. And he's given the authority, but he was given authority 2,000 years ago too, wasn't he given?
Yep.
So in Matthew 28:18, Jesus says, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and earth." But we can see he has been given all authority. It's just not, it doesn't seem to have been enforced up until, I'm guessing, these events when he, after or at Judgment Day, or I'm guessing when this seventh angel sounds in Revelation, where the kingdom of the world is become, or in verse Daniel 7:14, where it says that Jesus is given dominion, glory, kingdom, and all his people, nations, and language should serve him. So it seems or suggests at that point, despite having been given authority, God still gives almost like he gives like a period of time or something, and then it's enforced at this point. That's what I'm guessing. But the kingdom back to Revelation, the verse that Megan read was, "The kingdom of the world has become the kingdom of our Lord," or to come into existence. So there's a whole lot of wickedness in this world right now, as we all can recognize that, and it's getting worse. So even though Jesus seems to have the authority, it's not enforced as the way that I'm guessing that it will be. Is there a similarity to Jesus's current house to the way David's house hadn't really grown in 2 Samuel 23 that we read? You think there probably is? Or even in Achan, even with Achan and the children of Israel, who at that time couldn't defeat their enemies until the devoted thing was rooted out. Maybe that's the parallel here, but maybe that's what's ahead, which it's hard to really visualize because we've never lived or have seen that. Anyway, let's go back to Daniel and read the next two verses, 15 and 16.
Say that again, Dara. I'm sorry. So
Back in Samuel, 2 Samuel, we read just a little while ago, we found that David, who I believe is speaking on behalf of Jesus, said that his house hadn't grown. Remember?
right.
And we also had found that earlier that in Joshua, God wouldn't allow his people to defeat their enemies because somebody had taken the devoted thing. Yeah.
Right, that we read last week.
Right, but the reference in Revelation or in Daniel Jesus is given the authority back when he seems to have died, but
Yeah,
it's not really put into play like it seems to, it's going to be until his enemies seem to be rooted out, which seems to occur on Judgment Day. Because one
Right.
of his enemies seems to be this little horn who's blabbing away,
yeah,
right?
yeah, in the beast.
Yeah, right. And that fourth beast. So somebody want to read 15 and 16 in Daniel?
I'll read. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there and asked him the meaning of all this. So he told me, wait, 15 says, so he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things.
Why do you think Daniel's distressed or frightened, alarmed? What is he grieved? What do you think he'd be grieved about?
I don't know. I guess he was scared of the beast.
Yeah.
Yeah, that last kind of troubled him a lot.
The
I mean-
little horn, right?
I don't know,
Great
the,
and terrifying beast, right?
Maybe it troubled him because he couldn't interpret it, and he's so used to interpreting everything.
True.
That's a good point.
Maybe.
That's what I was thinking when I read it. How come you don't know, Daniel?
Do you think maybe, yeah, I would think, I would agree. You would think he's not grieved by the coronation or whatever of Jesus.
no,
No,
He's-
No.
probably. Although it is kind of weird that he sees the kingdom in essence given to Jesus, and yet he's still grieved because of what he saw. Wouldn't it be interesting to know what the little horn speaks?
yeah, maybe that's making him nuts.
Yeah, yeah,
You know.
that's what I wonder too. Yeah,
Yeah, nasty guy.
he's certainly probably sad or afraid by what he saw. Now here's an interesting parallel. In Revelation 5:4, and I think I referenced this last time. John, who was seeing the visions in heaven, said, he makes mention of how he wept much while he was like in the spirit or whatever, watching a vision in Revelation, because nobody was found worthy to open the book or look there upon the scroll or the book that they were, I guess, attempting to open.
Mm-hmm.
Which is odd because both of these guys who have a great love for God, in particular Daniel, who sees the end of the vision already and he's still very troubled, but John was very much troubled in Revelation 2, and it says he wept much. And here Daniel sees a heavenly vision and an earthly vision, and he's grieved or he is distressed or whatever you want to call him. I wonder, and I think you guys just said that, is it because of what he thought the visions might mean?
Mm.
Yeah.
Because-
And
Yeah,
I think seeing this stuff took a lot out of him. I mean, this is like, we don't see this stuff, and he saw a lot.
yeah,
So, and he was probably troubled because what does this mean? What is all this? What is all this? When's it going to happen? Who are these beasts? I mean, I can imagine, like, if you read about the prophets, sometimes the prophets like were exhausted after they saw visions. And they would just lay down and sleep because it was exhausting.
Wow.
I know, right? I mean, and I've heard, somebody had made mention of it was probably multiple visions. Like one of the visions he saw was, this big, and then another time he had another vision, it was maybe the rest of it or something like that. But I find it weird in that last verse we read that, well, the last verse in Daniel we read, he goes and he asks somebody for an interpretation. You ever had a dream and you turned around to somebody in your dream and said, "Hey, can you tell me what this means?"
Like, what do you think it means? Yeah.
Wonder who that was.
Yeah.
me. Oh, his friend. Yeah.
Yeah, who do you think was his friend?
I don't know.
Yeah, but I thought he approached somebody in his dream and asked that.
That's what I'm
Yeah, one
saying.
of the people standing there watching with
Maybe,
him.
maybe an angel or something,
That's
or,
what I would think.
That's what I thought when I was reading it.
Yeah.
yeah, certainly an unnamed spiritual being.
Oh, I didn't read it like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, read the next two verses, 17 and 18.
The four great beasts are four kings that will rise from the earth, but the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever.
So he turns around and asks somebody. And now let's look at this realistically. We saw a lot of detail about those four beasts.
Yep.
And all he says to him is there are four kingdoms that rise out of the earth, and then goes right to the end.
Yeah, I know, skips over a lot of detail. It's like, that's it?
I know, right?
I
mean,
know.
But we're right now. Do you know?
Say that
mean-
again, Dave.
I said, maybe that's what we're supposed to know right now. Like they put in there what we're supposed to know. They write the Bible and say the things we're supposed to know. We can't know everything or else we wouldn't need Jesus, would we?
True, but why would he be given such vivid detail of the other three and then say, yeah, well, don't worry about that? I could see if there was 8 beasts, but he was only shown 4, and they told him, well, these, like, you know what I'm saying? It's almost a
Yeah.
tease.
Yeah. 'Cause it doesn't
But-
really, yeah.
Now, here's another interesting thing in did you read verse 18, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought in verse 13 and 14, Jesus receives the kingdom.
Yeah.
But in verse 18, who gets the kingdom?
The saints of
By the holy people.
Yeah, the holy people, the saints or whatever, that's different. And so I wondered, is Jesus included within that? I mean, certainly he's a holy one. He's the holy one. But his people get the kingdom?
Maybe he gives it to him.
Yeah, that's probably what happens. I think.
Yeah, I agree. I just think there'd be so many questions that this opens up that are never asked. But one of the reasons why I wonder, because Daniel before we get to that point, we have to break and then come right back. So we'll start right here.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.